y'all, and welcome back to our inclusive leadership class. Happy to have you here, team. We are in our third week on voting rights and what impedes them. I hope that you learned a little bit about the history of voting rights the last couple of weeks, something that you didn't know about the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the events surrounding it in Selma, Alabama. And I'm excited to watch that movie with y'all next week. And yeah, so let's get into it. Today we're going to be talking about things that currently impede voting rights. And so we've talked a little bit about the history, we've talked a little bit about the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and so right now we're going to look at current challenges affecting voting rights today in America and in Washington state. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to go over and look at the handouts in our voting rights files in Microsoft Teams under class materials. Navigate over there, and I want you to take a look at two handouts. The first one is states with voting restrictions, and the second one is percentages of people who lack a government-issued photo ID between the years of 2008 and 2012. And after looking at those two, the map and then the graph, I want you to respond to these questions. Number one, what does each document show about who is or would be most affected by government ID requirements or other voting restrictions? And I want you to respond to these in your journal on Microsoft Teams. And then the second question is, what conclusions can you draw when you look at both documents together? So what sense are you making of these two documents and how these restrictions affect individual people groups? So take some time and go ahead and do that. All right, welcome back. And I want you now to take a look at two other handouts. I know we're doing a lot of handouts today. So if you are watching this on YouTube and you're interested in finding these handouts, please shoot me an email and let me know, and I'd be happy to share them with you if you're not a part of our Microsoft Teams page. And so I want you to look at the first handout is states with voting restrictions, and the second is percentages of people who lack a government-issued photo ID. So the same two handouts from the last slide. And here, I want you to compare your conclusions about these documents with what you know about how African Americans in the South were prevented from voting in the century between Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement. So if you'll remember all the way back to 2 weeks ago in our first session together, we talked about the history of voting rights in America and how African Americans were treated and prevented from voting. You listened to the story of Fannie Lou Hamer and several others through the selmaonline.org. And so knowing what you know, I want you to compare the conclusions that you came up with from the last slide and answering those two questions with what you know about what happened during in between Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement. And then I want you to make a chart, and you can do this either in Microsoft Teams in your journal. You should be able to create a table within there, and you can do your chart there. Or you can write it down on paper, and you can just create two columns showing similarities and differences. And I want you to do those similarities and differences between what you're seeing in the two documents that you looked at, the graph and the map, and the history of voting rights between Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement. So during that period of time and this period of time, what similarities do you notice and what differences do you notice? And then I want you to share that chart, screenshot it and share it to the post section on Microsoft Teams, or take a picture of your written chart and post it in Microsoft Teams. So I'll give you some time to go ahead and do that. And of course, if you have questions, feel free to send me a message on Teams or shoot me an email. Okay, so now that you've completed that, I know we're doing a lot of activity today, but really I want this to be a hands-on learning opportunity. And if you need help finding resources or accessing resources for this next step, then please let me know. So individually or with a partner or group, I want you to select one of the following current efforts to limit voter registration. So there are several efforts right now that are limiting voter registration in various states across the country. And so I'd like you to pick one, and you're going to do a little bit of research on it. So here are your options. Number one, end of same day voter registration. So that means being able to register on the same day that you vote. Number 2, end of motor voter registration. That means you can register to vote when you're at the Department of Licensing, if you're getting a driver's license, etc., or a photo ID. And then number 3, residency requirements that affect college students. So college students being able to vote in the state that they are going to college in, or being able to forward their ballot to the state that they're from. Number 4, proof of citizenship requirements, and that it can also include voter ID laws. Number 5, restrictions on voting for those with felony convictions. And we talked about that, I think, last week or the week before. So what I want you to do is I want you to research one of these 5 challenges, or if you have another challenge that isn't on this list of 5 that you think you want to cover, feel free to do that as well. There are many other options that you can look at, including redistricting and things like that that make it harder for people to engage in voting opportunities. So I want you to research the challenge that you've chosen, and I want you to make a PowerPoint. It doesn't have to be long, it can be very short, it can be 3 or 4 slides, but I want you to make a PowerPoint presenting what you've learned. So I want you to at least give an overview of the challenge, what it is, why it's a problem, or why it's preventing or limiting voter registration. And then secondly, I want you to explain your challenge, what your challenge has in common with techniques that have been used in the past to limit access to voting. So kind of create a chart, a similarity difference chart again, but I want you to do it by comparing it to a specific challenge from the past. So, for example, some folks had to pay in order to register to vote, or they had to have the reference of 2 people that were already voting. They had to have those references brought in. Like, these are ways that, specifically in the South, African Americans were prevented from voting or had limited access to voting rights. And so I want you to look at one of these 5 and tell me, how does it connect to one of those past limits? And then the last piece, I want you to answer this question at the end of your PowerPoint. Do you think these new efforts could be challenged on the basis of the Voting Rights Act? Why or why not? Meaning, do you think that the Voting Rights Act, that these challenges fall under challenges that the Voting Rights Act could and should cover? And why do you think the Voting Rights Act should cover that or could cover that? Okay, and then the last thing I want you to do after you've completed your PowerPoint for the week, done your research, you've answered some of those questions, created your similarity and difference chart, where we're making a connection from the past to the present. The last thing I want you to do is I want you to read the handout titled Washington ACLU Voting Rights Frequently Asked Questions, and it's uploaded into our Microsoft Teams voting rights files folder. And I want you to answer these questions in your journal. Number 1, what is the Washington Voting Rights Act and why should it matter to voters in Washington state? Number 2, who supports the Washington Voting Rights Act and why do you think they support it? And then the last question I want you to answer is, how can you get involved with the Washington Voting Rights Act? So this is a specific Voting Rights Act to Washington state. So it's really applicable to us right here in our very own community. And so I would like us to make this final connection. We've looked at the past, we've looked at the present, both locally and federally. And now I want you to make the connection to you. How can you get involved in this? And what can you learn from what the ACLU is doing right now around the WVRA? And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I know that this was kind of a short video today with a lot of points for action on your part so that you can do some hands-on learning. So if you have any questions or you need help figuring it out, please let me know. And we will touch base on Friday on our Zoom call together. And I look forward to seeing y'all. Have a great rest of your day.